So the actual evidence on which the Daily Mail is running the piece featuring Miranda Hart and her bereavement after the death of her pet, Peggy. The actual evidence, the base of the evidence, the totality of the evidence, the context of the evidence is very limited. In that, there is only the perceptions of Miranda Hart herself about her pet. And there is no reference to any problems caused to the pet by any third party. In fact, the opposite. Apparently, the Peggy, when Miranda Hart was not herself able to or available to walk Peggy, the dog, she obviously had others do the work. And when Peggy was on walks with other people, Peggy was recognized as Peggy by passersby, and people noticed who she was. So there is no reference to any lack of protection or safety, in fact, the opposite. Now, to people who don't have that kind of protection and safety and security for their pets, there are more people with pets lack that kind of security. It's not to say that the lack of security and safety and protection for those many people and their pets is anything to do with the people who have the security and safety. It's a societal problem that is found everywhere. One particular person, resident Canadian person who lived in Ankara for some time and has now moved back to Canada with a kitten or a cat, said that cats were very well regarded in Ankara. But that is a very rare situation, rare place. So let's assume for the rest of the discussion and the world exclusive report on what happened to the kitten's house, which was attacked by a gang, altogether a gang, totaling about 12 or 14 in August 2012. The vast majority of people who are variously fond of cats and love cats, like cats, and are concerned for their welfare, even when they can provide that welfare and support. There is one group that is a group of people, a large number. It's not possible to allocate a proportion of the population, but significant numbers of people are of that disposition. There are people, however, in the population, and here we are talking about London, England, UK, and most of the world, but here we are talking about Tower Hamlets, East London. And we are talking especially about the cruelty to animals that are allowed to take place within Muslim community, within the Muslim population. And the Muslim population has visible numbers of people, men with a beard. Whatever the motivation for carrying a beard, or wearing a beard, or to put a vulgar term, sporting a beard, whatever the motivation, whether it's to do with the part of the tradition that the Prophet of Islam, peace be on him, had a beard, or whether it's a dishonestly kind of decided decoration in order to put on an appearance of respectability, trustworthiness, and even of piety by the particular wearers. This could be deceptive and it could be dishonest. The fact that somebody is a Muslim or claims to be a Muslim or even performs the ritualistic prayers and does other things which are part of the tradition and culture of being a Muslim. The fact that a person can do those things does not mean that these people themselves are honest, truthful, and pious. Many people in the Muslim community, I'm talking globally, and in Muslim populations in specific areas, are known criminals, known perpetrators of vile acts against people, other people, whether they're Muslims or not. And many of the sexual abuse of children that take place in the society generally take place within the Muslim families. I've mentioned this before. And the children being sexually abused, exploited, raped, and incestuously exploited in many ways, many of these children, a higher proportion of them are girls. Their lives are destroyed. And these children, these girls, are caught in a trap, which is in breach of all the rights that are declared to be the rights of children and rights of women and rights of individuals in many of the dozens of the international charters and agreements. So we shall be updating on all of these in due course. But this is the context, and this is the third part, effectively, of the discussion of the evidence, the retailing, the listing of the evidence of the attacks, series of attacks that took place against the Kitten's house in August 2012. The Kitten's house was based in Brick Lane. And the attacks were being plotted during July 2012. And just as the 2012, quote, Olympic Games were about to start, that actually are starting. So anyone who wants to look at the map of the area Brick Lane, it's available, and the smaller side streets adjacent to the kitten's house, behind the kitten's house, are not necessarily marked in the map. One street which may be marked is called CAD Street, CAD, CAD Street, or CUD, Card Street. Shall be looking at the map before the program finishes, and I shall confirm the actual spelling. It says Code Street, CODE, Code Street. Now, the Code Street is to the left of the Buxton Street going east, and to the right of Buxton Street going west into Brick Lane and through to Quaker Street on the west. Now, where it says now the Brick Lane Post Office is not far from the site of the kitten's house. So the kitten's house was to the west of Code Street. There is a building, and there is a side street which is not marked here. So to the north of Buxton Street And parallel to the Code Street, there is a side street behind the complex of buildings that were numbered 160 to 170 Brick Lane on the eastern side of Brick Lane going north from the south. And that is the continuation. The Brick Lane is the continuation of the motorway or the road known as B134. So B134 actually starts almost opposite from the Alta Valley Park, opposite the Alta Valley Park, which is to the right of the A11. In other words, the Whitechapel Road going east. And the A13, which is the commercial road, follows from Whitechapel High Street. So if we start from the B134 from A11 junction to B134, and it becomes Brick Lane, and going northwards, we come to a place where on the map are marked Quaker Street on the left, Buxton Street on the right, and Brick Lane, of course, in the middle. And there is a image of an envelope suggesting the Brick Lane post office. So the Brick Lane post office, where it is now, there was no post office then in 2012. So Brick Lane post office and the Buxton Street and the Code Street, these signs surround the substance, the substantive numbered doors to the Kitten's house. And the Kitten's house was situated just above, let's say, to the left of the Code Street. There is a side street, and next to the side street was the entrance, the southern entrance to the Kitten's house. Now, the Kitten's house, therefore, is the name given collectively to a number of spaces in that road. 160 Brick Lane led to the entrance to the Kitten's house. Coming in from Brick Lane, to the left was the Kitten's house entrance, and to the right was a room that is, let's say, call it the open space, unoccupied otherwise, but used to house the storage, house the archives. Let's say 1/10 of the archives. And then going out of the 160 Brick Lane into Brick Lane and walking past 162 Brick Lane and getting to 164 Brick Lane and entering Brick Lane, 164 Brick Lane, and walking through the entrance and reaching the courtyard. That is the courtyard leading to the Kitten's house main entrance, main door. And the Kitten's house, that space had another lot of the archives. And the archives contained desktop computers and other computer devices, smaller ones like MacBook. There are several MacBooks. MacBook Pro came out later than when this particular main collection of the tablets, computers were purchased. The latest MacBook Pro was bought from the Apple store in the Regent Street, and the check was used. A check was used to pay for that particular one. So it would have been bought sometime in 2010. So the archives were two places we have identified, and then there was a basement that is immediately underneath the main entrance to 164 Brick Lane, which had the other lot of the archives. And we shall cover this, and then we shall move to, not necessarily in this part of the diagnosis of Fleet Street, but in the continuing next part, we shall identify the locations of the archives in the same area, not necessarily the same street, but in the same area. Let's call it the Brick Lane area. Let's move back to September 2011, just under a year before the attack on the Kitten's house was carried out. The archives contained the items that we have detailed before. Essentially, the archives contained in various formats, in various storage devices, including computers that had the active hard disks, main documentary and documented materials, including all the formats, let's say text, sound, and film. So in terms of the media containing the contents, all the up-to-date technological devices that were available in the ordinary market for ordinary consumers had been included in the archives collections that are being built up and expanded every day. They had the printed materials, newspapers, magazines, newspapers like this one, of course, and magazines, and all the storage devices that came on the market during, let's say the decades starting from the 1970s. All kinds of formats of storage devices, all kinds of photographic equipment and films were included, and any number of undeveloped, actually used films, rolls of films, but not yet processed. So they would amount, altogether, they would amount to the contents that would exceed the collections of any known average public library in the UK. But that's not all. The contents were specialist contents, specialized contents. So therefore, an item like this one on Miranda Hart would have been collected, accompanied by other items to support the evidence in the central story. And the areas of activity, learning activities, covered in the archives, the areas included all the known disciplines in any known setting of a college or academic institution, research institution. So if there were 100 items on anything, then because of the intense, specialized and specialist dedication of expertise and information that was established after multiple checking and fact checking, every 100 item, if you like, every 100 item would actually represent at least 10 times the volume and the content and the quantity and the quality and the veracity. So for every item of information that was packed into boxes represented several decades work. And although I'm calling them archives, the more accurate description would be action archives. That is to say, depending on which particular discipline, which particular issue, which particular subject, an event, incident was under reference or review, all the archives were action archives because the particular discipline would be searched and updated throughout the time. That is what happened. So on the outside, apparently, they're not as, if they're not as clearly marked as, say, on a shelf in a well-ordered, well-organized public library or academic library, the actual contents were far more extensive, and they were all there, taken there since September 2011. And the reason why they were there will become clearer as we progress. But the essential reason why there were those archives, action archives, were taken to those addresses in Brick Lane, the main reason was the presence of the 3 kittens. In order to protect the kittens and look after them, the entirety of the archives were shifted to that address, but not all the archives available to our movement. These particular ones came from the address in Bethnal Green, near the Bethnal Green, let's say, road, between the old Bethnal Green and Hackney Road address. So we shall go further into those events in due course. Back to the attack on the Kitten's house. And as I said before, the attack on the Kitten's house was planned over at least 2 years. And the planning included, of course, the bearded Muslims as well as the non-bearded Muslims involved, who were being used and who were themselves using others. So it was a conspiracy motivated by a number of criminally minded perpetrators who shared the jahiliyat, or the ignorance, among them, regardless of what formal claims to formal schooling or training they could make claims to. They were inimical, that is, hostile to the idea of searching for the truth, looking for the truth and the evidence, and the whole outlook was dominated by complete and utter separation from morality, ethics, and society. So when they decided to mount the attack on the Kitten's house, they did not follow any of the ordinarily understood social ethics or morality, because their main purpose was to destroy the archives and to cause maximum hardship and suffering to the Kittens. And what that series of attacks kind of symbolized and highlighted and denoted, that is still continuing. And it was on the record, if anyone looked for the records prior to those attacks. Records meaning the records or known records, recollections of the behavior of the people with beard, Muslims with beards. Because although they carry or wear or sport the beard, these Muslims are known in Islamic community kind of circles, belong to that group of Islam conscious, Islam aware Muslims called the alims, or the mullahs, or the people who have the knowledge, let's say, because they are not necessarily kind of literate, but they have verbally acquired knowledge. So let's call them alims. And it is said that in the day of judgment, there would be identified by their records I'm not giving the exact number because I have to check the exact number before I give it. So I'll say evidentially, safely, that there would be found more than 70 different types of liars among Muslim learned people in the day of judgment. And it can be said with maximum safety that most of the Muslim learned liars would be found to be or have been wearers of the beard. So when the attacks took place or started, a number of other Muslims in the street, Brick Lane, were approached seeking their cooperation in providing access to empty spaces within their control so that the archive materials could be safely kept there for very temporary periods. And the names and the details of these individuals would be included in later versions, later updates. There was nobody that was found that could be trusted with any word they gave. Several words were given, but they were not kept. There were other Muslims, so-called, in the area whose very life and livelihood had depended on the work of the movement. It's not like a particular one-off incident. Their very lives were at stake, and those lives were saved by the movement, which had the responsibility for and was concerned about the welfare of the kittens. So all the kind of approachable people, that is to say, physically accessible in contact terms, not in morality or ethical terms, all the approachable and contactable sources in and around Brick Lane were contacted and approached. And the main purpose being to prevent damage being done to the archives and harm being done to the kittens. The A to Z, the item by item steps taken during those days and weeks will be, of course, added in the later parts of the exclusive evidential world commentary. The fact that none was available to help stop the attacks, in the sense that by providing space for the storage, shows the state of complete absolute darkness that exists socially, societally, within the Muslim population. So it is factually accurate to say that the age of darkness has been the main identity of the Muslim population, the age of darkness. So dark indeed that a very intense scanning, mentally, very intense scanning of the people, approached and approachable, revealed the total absence of any pot of call, any person that could be called upon to express even an understanding of what the attack meant and what was going on. So although biologically, physically, the people, most of the people implied in this reference were breathing and therefore were alive, morally they were dead. Ethically, they were dead. Spiritually, absolutely dead. Imagine the naming of the companion who carried a cat around him always. The cat carrier was very fond of cats, and so he was given the name by the Prophet of Islam, peace be on him, as the father of cats, the father of the kittens. And he also was one of the most prolific writers of the records of their knowledge of the Prophet's life as they saw them, the various events. So this prophet or prophetic kind of endorsement of the man who was given a perennial kind of everlasting mark of blessing as well by this level that he was the father of cats or kittens. Despite that, now most Muslims don't know that, not even today, don't know those facts as I am relating or as I am summarizing. Because this broadcast will not reach most of the Muslims of the world. It may reach significant numbers in due course, but not most of the Muslims. So the fact is known that the Prophet of Islam, peace be on him, loved cats. But that fact is known only to a small number of people. So the Muslim population is in total darkness about Islam. And going back to the reality of Britain and the reality of the actual agenda being pursued by the so-called Council of Mosques in Tower Hamlets, or the so-called branch of the so-called Council of Mosques, the branch in Tower Hamlets, which must contain at least 10 to 20, if not more, locally based smaller mosques, smaller than the number of people who are able to say prayers at the East London Mosque complex based in the Whitechapel Road. So the Muslims from all these mosques gather together at an address, which is more often than not near or inside the huge office spaces in the control of the cabal that controls the policies and the access to the East London Mosque. The East London Mosque also has been able to spy on passers-by on video cameras for a very long time. In fact, for longer than most public buildings in London. And the surprising thing is that none of the footage of the people walking past the East London Mosque, none of the footage has ever been published to my knowledge. So essentially, what is happening through and via that particular mosque is that activities by the various persons who in some way or other belong to one committee or more than one committee or a central structure or the unsigned structure of spies that spy on the community on behalf of the so-called committee or the actual controllers of the proceedings through the abuse of the resources of the big mosque and also the other mosques in the borough. To this day, there has been no known activity organized for ordinary musallis, that is the ordinary Muslims who go to the mosque to perform their prayers. Ordinary musallis have not been seen as organizing or taking part in any of the events that are ritualistically organized and staged by those who control the cabal controlling the mosque, East London Mosque. There is no social, ethical awareness program or activity going on. And this particular kind of agenda of Jahiliyat is being carried out, perpetrated by a number of otherwise kind of known as so when the attack on the Kitten's house took place, all these people were scanned mentally and they were found to be totally hostile to cooperating in the protection and safety and safeguarding of the cats and kittens and of the archives, action archives. And the fact that these persons, almost all of whom had beards, behaved as if they were morally, mentally, physically dead, shows the crisis among the Muslims. They were devoid of ordinary reflex action that springs into action, springs into life for any ordinary person when faced with a critical need to save a life under attack, let alone save the equivalent of several contextually equivalent, several libraries of Congress in context, which is what our action archives represent. So the people, in the name of doing business, careers, in the name of the Islamic faith in Tower Hamlets, went dead at the hour when true believers would have come to life and have taken part in rapid action to protect the kittens under attack and to defend the action archives under attack. They didn't. And that showed the state of depth in the Muslim community that had people otherwise walking and talking and giggling and smiling and taking part in social kind of exchanges. So we shall be talking more in due course, of course. This is 1900 hours GMT, 1519 hours GMT, let's say, on Wednesday, the 20th of January 2021.